I am very excited to bring up. We have three amazing speakers tonight. I'm going to drop their bios in the chat because I was telling them if I read all three of their bios, we would probably spend half the evening doing that, and we want to get right to the meat of what we're here to talk about. So I am going to introduce Kelly Dittmar. She is an associate professor of political science at Rutgers University, Camden, and director of research and scholar at the Center for American Women and okay, I'm butchering this. Director of Research and Scholar at the Center for American Women in Politics at the Eagleton Institute of Politics. And then we have Gita Dagger and Dr. Shana Hardin. Gita is the CEO and president of New American Leaders, and Dr. Hardin is the director of research and data at New American Leaders. So we are going to start by kicking it over to Kelly. So I'm going to bring her up and we will get started.
Thank you so much, and apologies. I have too many weird titles, so that's not your fault. I'm gonna share because in classic COP form, we're gonna share some data, and it's easier to do that, I think, by showing you some of this stuff via slides. So let me make sure I get my stuff going. So just thanks to the Julies for having me as a part of tonight's conversation. For those who don't already know, the Center for American Women in Politics is a nonpartisan research center housed at Rutgers University in New Jersey. It has for over 50 years tracked and analyzed women's political participation, representation, and power in the United States. We're probably most recognized for crunching the numbers on women candidates and office holders, which I'll focus on in my brief presentation today. But we also engage in research and programs to both understand why the numbers are or have been where they are, and also why that matters. And we also do programs to engage in interventions to increase women's political presence and power. And those are done not only in New Jersey, but nationwide. So today I'm going to give a lay of the land on women's political representation, as well as how women have fared in our most recent elections to speak to this question about women winning. So let's start out kind of with a basic sense of where women stand today. So women are 28.2% of the US Congress. They hold 26 of 100 seats in the Senate. That's a record. 125 of 435 seats in the House. That's not a record. 30% of statewide elected executive offices, including 12 of 50 governors. 33.5% of state legislators, about 2,000, almost 2,500 women serve as state legislators across the country. While this isn't a record high, the latest high was hit in 2025 as a result of the election. This is just a number that fluctuates throughout the year. Women are 32.4% of municipal office holders in cities over 10,000, 25.3% of mayors in cities over 30,000, and 37% of mayors in the top 100 most populous cities. So this just gives you the general kind of stats of where we stand. Women have, oops, sorry, wrong direction. Women have made representational progress, of course, over time, though progress is not inevitable. This is something we say a lot at COP, and it's often inconsistent. So the trends will also vary by levels and by party. So what is here, and there's a lot of data on here, but I'll kind of point you to some of the main points. At the congressional level, it's been pretty rare to see decline or stasis. But we have seen that kind of slowing in the past two cycles after these record years for women's success in 2018 and again in 20. At the state executive level, that's the bar chart here. Again, more variable here than maybe congressional offices, just because there are fewer of these positions. We're talking about 310 positions nationwide. We've seen steady increases, at least in the past 6 years, until again in 24. In the state legislature, again, you see this kind of stasis for much of the period since 1990, but 2018 again marked this jump, and we've seen again pretty steady increases since then, though the range, the magnitude of those gains have varied. Oops, sorry, one more thing I wanted to point out here. Progress also varies significantly by party. Again, we could talk more about this in Q&A, but let me just give a bit more nuance in terms of these numbers. Across levels of office, Democratic women outnumber Republican women. So 73% of Congresswomen, 2/3 of women governors, and 64% of women state legislators are Democrats. The party gap among women office holders is smallest at the statewide executive level, where Democrats are still the majority, 54% of women executives. The partisan story is also notable beyond the break that I just mentioned among women. Democratic women are also a much larger percentage of their party's caucuses than Republican women at both the congressional and state legislative levels. So again, more specifically, women are 42.8% of congressional Democrats and only 15% of congressional Republicans. They're 49.3% of Democratic state legislators nationwide and 21.3% of all Republican state legislators. In fact, Democratic women are at or above gender parity with Democratic men in 59 of 99 state legislative chambers. That's 60% of state legislative chambers. Republican women are only at parity in 3 chambers, and they haven't exceeded parity in any. And so that's worth us noting when we think about, again, the success, particularly on the Democratic side, and also what that means for the overall numbers. Our website and our online database of women office holders, which I'll put in the chat during the conversation, offer a lot more options to break down these data by state, level of office, party, race, ethnicity. But I do just want to speak briefly on racial and ethnic diversity, and I know my co-panelists are going to talk more about this and other characteristics, but let me just offer a few points. The racial and ethnic diversity among women office holders reached a new high as a result of the 2024 election, and we have seen notable increases over the past few decades, including a lot of important firsts across offices and levels. So just to break down where we are today, that's here. You can look at, Asian American Pacific Islander women across Congress, statewide, state legislature, and top mayors across the country. And instead of me saying all of these individual numbers, you can see the break by every racial and ethnic group. You still see white women as a dominant kind of presence in each of these populations, but we are seeing gains in the diverse racial and ethnic diversity among women at all of these levels. Where we see some of the slowest growth is in the statewide elective executive level, and we can talk again more about that. Just to give some points, though, on milestones, since 2016, we've elected the first Latina to the U.S. Senate and the first Democratic Latina governor, the first Native women to Congress, the first Muslim women to Congress, the first Black and South Asian woman as vice president. And we're also witnessing other types of diversity, including electing the first openly lesbian women governors, the first openly transgender women state legislators and congresswomen, and the youngest woman ever elected to Congress in the AOC in 2018. So how have women fared in recent elections to help achieve all of these gains and milestones? So women ran for and won offices across levels at record numbers in 2018 and 2020, with some slowing down in 22 and more of a stall in 24. This should serve as a reminder to all of us, again, that progress isn't inevitable and we can't slow down in the targeted efforts to recruit and support women candidates. You can see here the trends in the House in terms of candidates and office holders. And then what we did is, what I put here is just the success and the numbers of non-incumbent women winners, right? So these are the new women entering office after each election cycle. And you can see, even when we didn't see much of a gain, we were still electing new women in the last cycle as well. This is the same kind of look, but looking at it at the state legislative level. So again, we weren't seeing large gains in representation. And I'm sorry, I'm looking at this and I should have put the 25 number on the left, on the line chart, because you do see a little bit of a jump after the 24 election at the state legislative level. And again, you can just see how many of these women being elected were non-incumbents, were new to these levels of office. All of this reminds us that when women run, they do win. You hear this all the time, and I know tonight's conversation is to push this further in the narrative. In 2018, women outperformed men among non-incumbents at nearly every level in both primary and general elections. Women candidates won the majority of US House seats that flipped from Republican to Democrat in election 2018. And they were then ultimately responsible for the return to a Democratic majority that year. In 2020 US House contest, Republican women won the majority of seats that flipped from Democrat to Republican, again, narrowing the margin in that case of Democratic control. And both Republican and Democratic women, non-incumbents, outperformed their male counterparts in those contests. So you can see that in terms of the win rates, that they were outperforming men in both parties in that election. In 22 and 24, women fared about equally to men if we just look at win rates among Democratic non-incumbent nominees, but Republican men have continued to outperform their women counterparts in some of these US House contests. So again, we need to look at some of these partisan differences and what's causing that challenge. At the state legislative level, where we don't, in our data, directly compare win rates across gender, we know that women's gains, including reaching that new high in 25, are due in part to their capacity to win, including in some of the toughest contests. So this chart just shows the win rates for women's state house non-incumbents by party over the course of the last 4 elections. What I wanted to do here is just say, like, we're definitely seeing women win. This is a pretty high rate for non-incumbents, right? Even though it looks low, right? These are people who haven't run before or weren't in office. And so they may have run before, but weren't in office going in, so they don't have that incumbency advantage. Likewise, the gains, again, in racial and ethnic diversity across levels is a result of this electoral success, particularly by women of color. So I'm not going to detail the win rates by each year, level, and racial and ethnic group, because we'd be here all night and you'd be bored of me. But I do want to point out a few things that push back against this electability bias that is particularly hurtful to women who are in historically marginalized and underrepresented racial and ethnic groups. So just by way of examples, more than 1/3 of women of color elected to the US House for the first time in both 2018 and 2020, won in majority white districts, challenging any concerns or claims that these women are somehow unable to succeed in majority white electorates, which is something we've heard from some of those in the practitioner class and even among some voters. In 2024, of course, we elected 2 Black women to the US Senate for the first time. And so each of these examples pushes us against those biases that sometimes perpetuate a narrative that women cannot win, or these women particularly may not be successful. So I'm going to stop there, knowing that Shayna and Gita will dive more deeply into those types of successes, particularly for women who represent a class of new American leaders.
Thanks, Kelly. I appreciate your overview on all of this, and big shout out to COP and everything that you guys do. Thanks everyone for having us on today. We are very excited to be a part of this conversation. My name is Gita Dagger. I'm the CEO and president of New American Leaders and New American Leaders Action Fund. We are the only national organization that's dedicated to training and preparing and focusing on new Americans, so immigrants, first and second generation Americans, to run, win, lead in our democracy. That means them going as candidates or campaign managers or pursuing appointments. And all of those 3 areas are so critical to representation and decision making in our country. And that is our mission as an organization, is to focus. We have been at this since 2010. We started as a small project. We are now a national organization and have trained folks from 46 different states. We're really proud of that. This commitment to new Americans is not just something that's a talking point. It's a very lived part of our DNA as an organization, from the staff to the board to the trainers and the curriculum that we all utilize. That's all proprietary to our organization. It's by new Americans for new Americans. And as an organization, we support folks who are also in elected office around governance work and ensuring that they have the community and the continued learning, education opportunities for themselves once they're in office and are in decision-making positions. That's so critical and often overlooked. Running and winning is one thing, and then leading is a whole nother ball game that comes with its own challenges and opportunities. And it's really important for us to, as Kelly said, we've made significant strides overall. It's important to protect that. And one way to protect that progress is to also support those that are already in office. A little bit about just myself. before I turn it over to Dr. Harden on our team. I am a refugee. I moved to this country when I was about 10 years old. I am a new American myself, and not only am I a new American, I'm actually an alum of our programs. That's how I became acquainted with this organization. And I was very inspired. I was recommended for this program by then State Representative Rashida Tlaib, who is now Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. I'm from the Detroit area. And it was really totally altering for me in terms of my political engagement. I focused very much on policy and advocacy for a long time. And then when I walked into one of these trainings and I spent the time in that training, I looked around and it was Middle Eastern North African folks, it was API folks, it was Black immigrants, it was Latinos and Latinas. And I thought to myself, what if every room that I walked into, or a lot of the rooms that I walked into, looked like this, had leaders that looked like this? The convincing part about issues that matter to our community wouldn't require so much work. They would understand because these are issues that would be impacting them on a daily basis as well. So I'm really thrilled to be out here with you all. Over the last several years, we've really invested in our research and data work. And that's because we know that when we gather our own numbers, we can tell a story and we could tell about what's happening in this work. You know, we face a lot of realities, and often not everyone is as great as COP or ourselves in collecting data. And so we are sort of diluted or sort of looked at as a monolith when we're not. New Americans are very diverse communities, very diverse individuals and cultures, and all of that I think is something that's really important where we're talking about building political power and representation as a country and to take all of that into account. We are thrilled to have Dr. Sheena Harden had joined our team in the last year, and she has really built out this incredible set of research and data and tools and reports. And so Sheena, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about some of that work.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Geeta, and thank you, Kelly, for that wonderful overview of women's representation as a whole. First, I'm going to focus on the specific population that we work with and track here at New American Leaders. So I want to begin by defining who our research considers a New American, although we do train anyone who identifies with the New American experience specifically. So we define New Americans as individuals who are first or second generation Americans, first generation being those who immigrated to the United States, and second generation being those born in the United States to at least one immigrant parent. So tonight we're going to focus our discussion on information and data from our 2024 State of Representation Report, which is a report that we produce every 2 years that highlights New American representation in state legislatures across the country. And our newest resource, which is the New American Candidate Database, where we publicly track New American candidates for state legislative, state executive, and congressional elections. So first, I'm going to begin with the big picture of New American representation in the 2024 prior to the 2024 election cycle. So in 2024, we had New Americans comprise almost 5% of all state legislators nationwide, which marked a 22% increase in just from the 2 years prior that we did our last report in 2022, showing real momentum for this group of individuals. When we move to focusing on New American women's representation specifically, we find that New American women actually outnumbered men in state legislatures for the first time in history when we've been collecting this data, which is really exciting. And among these elected women, the top performing states in terms of representation are New York, California, Arizona, and Washington. Over half of these women were newly elected in this prior cycle, so prior to the 2024 elections. Most were Democrats, with Latinas and AAPI women making up the largest racial and ethnic groups among New American women represented. When we shift to post-2024 election trends, we see that New American women continue to outnumber men in state legislatures, which continues to be really exciting for us and our populations that we work with. So overall, 71% of New American women candidates won their general elections compared to just over 61% for men. When we begin to break that down a bit more, today, 53% of all New American state legislators are women. In 10 states, we actually saw that every new American woman on the ballot won. And some of the most impressive win rates that we want to highlight here came from women with origins in the Dominican Republic, Haiti, and Iran, who achieved 100% win rates. Even with additional barriers, we found that 61% of Muslim women candidates who identified as new Americans won their general elections, which is really exciting. This success wasn't limited just to state legislatures. At the congressional level, we saw 85 new American women run for US Congress, and they had a win rate of almost 58% in general elections. Although we want to highlight, and similar to what Kelly mentioned, that state executive still has a long way to go for women's representation. But Latina and AAPI women led both in participation and in win rates at the federal level, which is showing where investment and opportunity are really converging. I want to take a brief moment to highlight women alumni from our training programs. So we had 47 women alum run for office in 2024 across 15 states, and as you can see, various levels of office. Our alum had a collective win rate of nearly 64%, and it was even higher for Black alum who had 100% win rates and AAPI alum. So these numbers truly reflect, the power of intentional investment in women of color and women from immigrant backgrounds. Now, when we look ahead to the 2025 state legislative elections, we're tracking. We have 16 new American women who participated in primaries for state legislatures in New Jersey and Virginia. These women achieved an 81% win rate, and 13 of them will be participating in general elections this fall. So something to watch. To close out, we just want to encourage everyone to read and use the resources that we've mentioned here today, and they're listed, and we will also share the slides after this presentation. We want to also highlight that we have some exciting projects coming up, including a collaborative fact sheet on new American Latino representation and barriers to representation, which will be released during Hispanic Heritage Month. And we're also expanding our new American candidate database to cover 2025 mayoral elections, along with tracking those outcomes for state legislative elections in 2025. So thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to getting more into this discussion.
Okay, I have some questions. I know you all are dropping questions in the chat. Keep dropping those as we go. Julie's collecting them, and then we'll try to take the last 15 minutes to address those. So thank you guys for all of that incredible data. It was really interesting to learn some of that. Was there anything in the data that surprised you or stood out?
For us, absolutely. As new Americans, I think especially in the last election cycle that was so polarizing and so heated when it comes to the topic of identity, equity, and in particular around immigration. And at the root of who we are as new Americans is immigration in of itself. So for us to see, having a 71% general election win rate was really phenomenal and really powerful to see that for new American women in particular. And to see that, especially within that Black women led the group with an overall win rate of 84%, this isn't a story that everybody doesn't talk about. This is the stuff that gives us hope on a daily basis as an organization. That's also the reason why it's so important to do this work. I think we often talk about these things and these wins as outliers, as these women who have done something phenomenal. Yes, they have done something phenomenal, but there's many of those stories, and they're all worth, uplifting in that way. For me, it is, I feel that there's this almost forced narrative that's being sort of shoved down our throats about us being anti-immigrant and anti-people of color in this country when it's not true. When it comes to particularly state legislatures, we're seeing that voters are coming out and they're identifying with these new American women when they run, and they are winning at those high rates.
Yeah, I wouldn't add too much. I mean, it's hard to surprise me a lot these days in terms of some of this data, but I do think, while I want to be optimistic, obviously, about all these trends, but it's not actually that surprising, but it is something to be maybe more attentive to, which is just making sure that we're keeping our eye on the ball, right? And I think the work that New American Leaders is doing is obviously helping us to be sure that we're still maintaining these gains for women across different communities, across different groups. But these things can slip. And so what we saw in 18 and 20 was all this attention to the waves of women and oh my gosh, the pink wave and all of that. And a lot of like myself and folks at COP, we were like, okay, everybody just temper, like calm down because we have to sustain this. And so I do think that in some ways, some of the statistics from 24 might be surprising to folks because there's an assumption we'll continue these monumental gains for women across all of these spaces and places. But that takes a lot of work. And it also takes motivation for women to want to be involved. And so the politics of today, again, seeing that there are so many of these women that are still willing to run and be successful is important. But, what can we do to increase those numbers even more is just something that I think we should keep in the conversation.
Well, and you've touched on this a little bit, but I mean, I've had friends myself because I know I work in politics and they're just like, well, women, we can't run them. It's not good. We just need to put up those white men. And I just really want to push back on that. But I want to know why you all think that is still the perception that women can't win, especially women of color can't win. And then what you just said, Gita, the whole notion that, there's this big controversy with immigration, but that's not what's happening in your data. So I'd love to know why you feel that perception is still persisting.
I mean, these are really outdated narratives that I think people are trying to cling on. And in particular, to call out one particular audience is white men are really trying to cling to that narrative in particular. And, these systems, I want to be also very clear that these systems weren't created with the image of women of color in mind. These were created with the image of white land owning men centuries ago at this point, right? And when you think about what this country is now and what it was when it was created, those are very different things. And then women couldn't own land, right? They didn't work, right? They didn't have anybody actually who wasn't rich, didn't have the luxury to leave their land to go days away, a place that's days away from them to a capital and serve for free, right? And put in something for free. And so anything that is, I think, threatening that structure, I think is a way of controlling a population in a lot of different ways. And so I think it's a very outdated narrative, and it is very much based on structural bias, right? And I think the other thing is too, as women, we carry, in particular, new American women, we carry multiple identities at the same time. I myself, I am a woman, I'm an immigrant. Others are wives, they are mothers, they are people of color, they're nurses, they're teachers, they're all of these different things. And that has always been historically marginalized. But our work shows that establishment of the countering that establishment is so critical because it solves real world problems that we are all facing on every day within our communities. We've seen that when those perceptions change, we see that there's more barriers being broken, that there are more firsts that are happening. We have lots of really great examples, and I also love to just shout out and uplift members in our network who are special in this way and do phenomenal work. For example, Cindy Nava is a former DACA recipient who faced lots of barriers, as you can imagine, as someone who was formerly undocumented, who's now a state senator in New Mexico. Those are phenomenal stories. Somebody in Colorado, for example, like Yara Zowakai, she's an Iranian American who was elected to the legislature. And these are phenomenal individuals who have so many different parts of their identity and their leadership that are important to highlight. Yara, for example, is a tax attorney who has taken on the IRS and the Department of Revenue in Colorado to protect small businesses, in particular of people of color, right? And this person's also has a nonprofit that was teaching folks how to make sure that they were getting vaccinated during COVID. She's a mom of 3 youngsters. She served in office. It's just her first time serving in office. And while doing that, she brought in her whole family into the process. And in addition to all of that, she drives an hour and 45 minutes to the Capitol and back every day from Fort Collins to make sure that she has dinner with her family. And all of this is done, where she's getting paid $48K a year to do this. Right? So there's a lot of barriers and a lot of parts of the story that aren't told, but are so critical to countering these outdated notions that women can only do so many things at once or have to fit these specific molds for us to be successful politically. Cindy and Yara alone demonstrate that we can break so many of these molds by just being ourselves and really stepping into our leadership.
Kelly, I'm going to turn to you on it, but I do want to say this is fitting right within the red, blind, and blue narrative because our whole thing is that women get shit done because we just do, right? We have to multitask. So that is the ultimate, though, hour and 45 each way and still having dinner with your family. Kelly, do you have thoughts on that? Or Shayna, feel free to jump.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, like, obviously, I do think, the perpetuation of that electability bias is often an excuse. It's part of the racism and sexism that Gita is talking about. We hear it among like a consulting class. We hear it among party leaders who are still dominantly white men in our country. That said, I do think there are actually some, like in the aggregate, there are people who are just looking to the highest levels of office and not seeing the type of diversity, both gender and racial diversity, that would sell them on the fact that women can win at all these places. So it's a little bit of it's a lack of understanding, and it's wrong, right? Because we do see women win at these highest levels. We do see them win the most difficult races. But if they are still seeing a system that is dominantly white and dominantly male, it is going to influence their perception of who is electable. We know this from literature. We know this from psychology. It's the kind of you can't be what you can't see image. And so that behooves us even more to tell the type of stories that Gita is telling, to be out there making sure that people see and know all of these success stories, not only that women are winning, but where they're winning, the types of contests they're winning, and also what they're doing once they're there. Because at the end of the day, people ultimately, a lot of the people who are here tonight probably, want to see change in a system. And so they want to know that who's best to do that. And in many cases, it is women who haven't been at the table before. So I just think I would just add that piece of it in, which is there is some logic to why it is hard for people to fathom something that they haven't seen before. But thankfully, they are seeing it more and more.
Yeah, I was just curious too. You kind of mentioned this, but like you all, both of your organizations are putting out all this amazing data, and I just don't see it being reported in the media. What do you think's going on there? Is it because it's more state house level, local level, or is it just purposeful? I mean, I guess I want your take on why you think that this stuff is not being reported in the media.
I might do a quick one here because I'll be curious what you guys think, Gita and Shayna. I mean, actually, I'm a little more optimistic. As being at an organization that has struggled to get that kind of attention for 50 years, since 2016, we've been talking to a lot more media. We are very lucky if you all don't follow the 19th News that has been built around making sure that there is a kind of gender and intersectional lens on our political news. I think now it's about where are you getting your news, right? And so I do think there are places and spaces. We have a lot more reporters who have a beat, if you will, that is on gender and race. Is it enough? No, of course not. For any of us, and what we do, we think our story is the most important story. But I do think there are more and more opportunities than we've seen before to get these stories out there. And then it just, the audience has to also be asking for and demanding this type of information. What I worry about, as I've kind of already said, is it was like the hot story. And now if we don't sustain these like massive levels, that it becomes less of a story. So I think that's where I would say like some of this continued story isn't being told. And I think that's largely because one, we're not seeing the numbers as large as they were. And two, we can all acknowledge that the political chaos that we're in means that our story isn't front and center. So.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo all of that. And I would also say that, we very much live in a clickbait kind of culture when it comes to media. And we also have an obsession politically with firsts. is, a big part of this conversation. Everybody wants to be the first, and then we lose track of it, right? And then we only refer to that person as the first for forever on, rather than thinking about everything else that comes with that or building the long-term gains that should accompany those wins. And so I would say that obsession with that is a really, it's both worth celebrating and important, but sometimes it's also harmful when it's like an obsession of what's sexy in the moment, and what's sexy is that we're the first and we're this and we're that. It kind of hinders. But then also on the flip side of that, anything that person does, it is associated with them that they are the first, right? That we don't talk about anything else that they have accomplished or the significant, incredible policy implementations that they have done to benefit communities and working class and women and all of these different things. We just focus that that's the first. So it's very interesting to see that. But also because of that in particular, and because we don't see a lot of coverage on women, it was really important for us to start the New American Candidate database. It's so that we are tracking the stories, we are tracking the wins, and are following up and following the careers of these really incredible leaders who are putting themselves out there, so that we are able to amplify and tell their stories more clearly. And also, I think it makes it easier for them to win again when they do get some of this coverage. In general, there's a traditional way of campaigning, there's a traditional way of running for office. And if you don't fall within that, it makes it hard to sometimes get attention. You're doubted. But when we do break through those and are doing them in a way that reflects our own communities, the needs of our own folks, maybe different cultures incorporating into that, then we are starting to see a little bit more coverage on that. And I'll give an example. It's not a woman, but Zohran in New York, mayoral candidate, has made it through the primaries, now the general, has adapted so much of the New American Leaders playbook. And that's really our playbook that we talk about. It's doing things in ways that resonate with your communities. And we've seen so many women do that, like Ilhan Omar fundraises in a way that's totally different than a Nancy Pelosi, right? And so it's telling even the stories. I think it's not just about the wins, it's about how they are winning is also just as critical in that storytelling.
Yeah, I just want to add something quickly. Kind of what Kelly said is we are optimistic. We are seeing more news coverage, especially among our populations and New American women. But we also want to highlight that sometimes New American women's, policy credentials are often overshadowed by a lot of comments on their appearance or their accent or their family background, and figuring out ways where we can adjust the narrative there too around how women are being covered. Because just because they're being covered more doesn't mean that it's always, positive coverage, especially due to a lot of gender stereotypes that they face.
That is a incredibly valid point there, Shayna. Thank you for bringing that up.
Julie, could I just one quick follow-up on that, which is just to say that often the stories are also, and I think both Gita and Shayna are getting to this, there's a tendency to like aggregate women. Like this is the women's story of 2018. This is the women's story of 2024. That I think is an ongoing challenge in media. And I have some sympathy for the journalists who get one column, right? But just how do you tell a more complex story? And again, I think that speaks to what you guys are doing and speaking about at New American Leaders.
I'm just curious that you all work and talk to so many candidates. Do you think the perception that women, or especially women of color or immigrants, like the perception you can't win, do you think that is a hindrance for people stepping up to run or making the decision to run?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it differs from area to area, and that's because of the gains that have happened in a place. You could be in a rural place that has never seen a woman of color run and win, run, period. Forget winning, just running in general. And then you might go to a place like New York City where it's the norm, right? And so those are very different experiences, but there are hindrances around this, and some of them, and I would say it's really important, like that these fears are valid for some folks. We're talking about things like, are they going to be judged for their accent, their faith, the fact that they're not adhering to traditional gender norms, right? For some folks. And these are not only valid because candidates from our communities are often not only just held to a higher and harsher standard, there's also a fear of political violence that is continuing to be on the rise, and women of color in particular face it at a much higher rate than our white counterparts, and let alone the men counterparts, right? In general, whether that's digital, that's in person, that's verbal, sometimes it's physical. And there's lots of stories on this. And, the Brennan Center actually did a great report on this that we should actually circulate that folks are aware. And sometimes in the same way that we talk about, women going to a health provider and our ailments not being taken seriously, sometimes the threats against women in the political environment are not taken as seriously as well. And so these are real perceptions that hinder women from taking on or pursuing some of these. But I do think it's really important to be aware and to prepare for some of these things. And I want to encourage folks that while there's no guarantees when you enter this work, I think the more you surround yourself with the right groups of people and surround yourself with the right organizations and resources, the easier that this work is. For us as New American leaders, we provide a community, we provide a training ground, we make sure that folks are connected to one another. And so that nobody feels alone, truly alone in this work. We can provide a community that transcends their local area or their geography. And so I would say that it's really important because of these hindrances, because of these perceptions. It's really important that we continue to ask women to show up. We continue to ask women to run for office, even if it means multiple times, because men, they don't have the same hindrances. And I think the more encouragement that we are able to provide someone, not just verbally, but actually showing up in our actions, it makes a real difference for women's representation.
I would echo that. I want to dispel a myth here because we hear there's a myth that has been going around for many, many years that you have to ask women 7 times to run for office, blah, 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 blah. That's not true. However, Gita's right that the research does show that encouragement matters more for women. So the ask can have more of an effect for women, but it also, the research we've done on the decision making that women go through to become candidates is not that you just ask them and then they run. It's you ask them and you tell them, as Gita's saying, like, you will support them and here's the path. Right. That's why these types of trainings, that's why getting more women to donate to women. That's why creating a support infrastructure for women who are considering running for politics is so important, because their decision making is very rational. Right. They're looking at you've heard this one, men wake up, they look in the mirror and they say, I'm going to run for governor. Right. That is less often the case for women. And it's not just because they're not confident. It's not just because, they're meek. It's because they see a system that's already biased against them. And they want to know that if they're going to expend the time and resources, energy, put themselves or their families at risk, that it is worth it, that they can win, and that if they win, they can get shit done, as you said, once they're in office. And so when we think about what's discouraging women, I think it is this broad range of things. It's one, have you proven to them that they are and assured them that they are electable, but also told them how you're going to help to be sure that they are elected. What are the ways that you're going to help on that path to success? And so really kind of that all-encompassing support infrastructure at the same time that you're dispelling the broader myth about electability. I think those things combined are really important and will and have. We've seen it change the game in getting more women to run.
And I'll add to that too, that I think it's important to note that this actually exists across all political identities, these perceptions of women and when they run for office. And even actually when I often talk to women of color and I'm coaching and engaging women of color in their leadership, I often say, what is one of your biggest hindrances? And it's inter-party politics and dynamics, actually. It's within their own parties. And most women of colors electoral aspirations die in the primaries because parties tend to invest in more the traditional candidates versus those who they consider riskier candidates, right? And so I also want to call that out because I think it's important that both parties need to be more inclusive and they need to be able to really lean in and listen in on to their candidates and not just go with who they think is the easiest candidate to support, because that makes a huge difference. And that is what's going to actually break some of these perceptions and these barriers as well.
Oh, I can second what you just said, just from anecdotal evidence. I'm talking to people on this team who work with candidates and the lack of support. So yes, when you said that, I'm like, absolutely. Okay, I know we're gonna get to the Q&A from the chat. So final question for me is, what should we be, everyone on this call, what should we be watching heading into the next cycle and make the next couple cycles? And what can people on this call do tonight specifically to spread the word about women can win and what they can do to help these candidates?
Yeah, I think Shayna covered a little bit about New Jersey and some of the excitement that's happening around that, and seeing some record number of women of color, new American women in particular, running and winning. And I think that's a real indicator of 2026 and what's to come. I think there's a lot of also a lot of eagerness around what's happening right now, and for women to step up at all levels. And so I think 2026 is going to be very hot. It's going to be very exciting, which is really wonderful. And I think we'll see record number of people running and winning. In terms of what folks could do on this call, let's share and talk about these wins. Let's not just continue talking about the ones that we see about, congressional folks in the media. Let's highlight some additional folks who maybe aren't getting the limelight, like some of the, bigger candidates. Support women in your own community. I can't say this enough. When women in your own backyard are running, and please support them. Step up. Donate to them, volunteer, offer your pro bono services, things like help with social media posts, create treats for volunteers, whatever it might be. There's a role for everybody in a campaign. And as a former campaign manager, I can tell you a winning campaign is one that creates room for others to be in it and bring whatever talents that they have. And then lastly, I would say support organizations like New American Leaders and COP. We do incredible work that's to build on this progress. And whether it's referring someone to go to one of our trainings, whether it is to donate to make the work possible, there's lots of ways to do that both organizationally and on the individual candidate and leader level.
Would echo a lot of those things just in terms of what we're watching for in the next cycle. Obviously, we're looking to see where the trends go in terms of women running overall, but also by all these specific groups that we've been talking about. Keeping our eye on the ball in terms of recruitment and early support for women, especially at the state legislative and U.S. House levels, because we are not assured that these numbers are going to go up. They didn't go up at the congressional level last time. They just barely went up at the state legislative level. And so making sure that we're being attentive, telling the story, and encouraging and supporting women who are thinking about running. There are women running in some notable contests. Something to watch for is that half of the women governors that currently serve, 6, are either being termed out or retiring from office. The rest of them are up for election. So like the number of women at this highest level that does get a lot of attention, that's on the line. And so paying attention to those gubernatorial as well as some of the Senate opportunities. Already 2, I believe, women, have announced their retirement from the U.S. Senate. So these are places where we need to be filling vacancies in order to both sustain and gain. And then what can anybody do? A lot of what Geeta said, share the reports and data that we're all sharing with you. Be aware that they're nuanced and share that nuance. I think also investing in women candidates, getting others to invest in women candidates. I've shared a couple times in the chat. Folks have been asking about money. So we have a Women, Money, and Politics Watch that we've been doing the last couple election cycles. It talks about the underrepresentation of women donors. Women on average give less than men. But when they give more to women. And so if women would invest a bit more in politics, I think it would benefit women candidates. And then tell these stories, as we've been talking about on the call. It's not just about the numbers. We spend a lot of time talking about the numbers, but telling the stories about why it's so important that women are in these conversations, especially now when we see so many policies that disproportionately affect women, affect communities of color, affect immigrant communities. How do we make sure that we tell a story of why it matters to have those perspectives at the table? Too often in our work, and I'm sure my colleagues get this, they'll say like, well, you're just asking me to vote for a woman or insert identity because they're a woman. And that's just not the case. We know through lots of research, we know through our own lived experience that experience and perspective changes dialogue and outcomes in any of these governmental settings. So it isn't about bean counting, right? It's about making an impact on policy and making sure that this representative democracy is actually representative of the people who are citizens and who are constituents in it. And so we need to be telling those stories and making the case for why we need greater diversity of representation.
Julie, one more thing that I do want to plug in for actually 2026 is, it takes women a lot more work to run and actually win. And, we have to break some of these barriers that we've talked about. We have to battle some of these perceptions. And so one that I want to caution people not to fall into a trap is I think what you're going to see, and I think it's actually a really encouraging sign, is I think we're going to see a lot of women who previously ran and lost run again. And I don't want folks to dismiss candidates who have lost previously, and women in particular. Men, you could do whatever, but what women in particular, don't dismiss them because they lost a first time or even maybe a second time. I can't tell you how many really powerful and incredible and thoughtful and inclusive leaders have lost previously before actually winning and holding office. And so I think this is an opportunity to support and also jump in and be thoughtful in how we support them and wrap our arms around them. I think many of the folks that we would highlight in our community have previously ran and lost. And I would never take those losses as complete, being in the negatives. I would think about it as that even those losses have broken barriers for somebody else, if they weren't going to run again, for somebody else to run in those positions and to push the barriers and to break the mold and to do more of that. So don't get discouraged by those losses. And if you see names that you've seen before, don't get discouraged by that either. I actually think you should be really excited by that.
I'm going to bring Julie up because I know we have questions in the chat, but I will shout out that I had two friends who ran for office here where I live, a black man and a woman, and they both lost the first race. And the second time they ran for those positions, they came in first. So love to promote that. All right, Julie, turn it over to you. We may go a little over and we may have several questions. So
Yeah, there's lots of questions here. So one of the first ones that folks ask is, why do you think that more Dem women than Republican women, are involved in running? And I personally think it's the platforms, but what are your thoughts?
I mean, I can just speak to, I've been talking a lot about support infrastructure, right? Like what is available. So there are a couple of things on the Republican side, and I'll put a report in the chat that we did that we released in 23 that just kind of proves this through evidence. But that Republicans in general, and you've heard this, are kind of anti-identity politics, very much promote a language of meritocracy, and we can be very critical of what that actually means in practice. But it makes it very hard to then bolster a support infrastructure that is targeted around gender identity. And so when you look at PACs, like you look at an Emily's List versus Winning for Women, and not to discount the work Winning for Women is doing, but the amount that they actually can spend and support women candidates in a race is significantly less than the progressive side, because there is less buy-in literally to these gender targeted programs. The same is true when you look at training programs. There are just far fewer that are targeted to Republican women. So there's a problem. There's a problem in terms of the thinking about how much we need gender targeted solutions. There's also a problem in terms of problem definition. Republicans are much more likely to say, like, we're good. We don't need more women in office. Like, everything's fine. We should just elect people based on their merit. And so it's not as big of a problem in need of targeted solution. So support infrastructure disparities, problem definition, aversion to gender targeted solutions. And then I know folks in the chat have been saying that it's an ideological, it is based on there are more women who are Democrats. That is true. However, we're talking of 60-40 in the electorate, right? So there still should be a lot more Republican women in office if you're actually representing the electorate. So yes, but also, a lot of it is structural and kind of cultural to the party.
So where on your website are the graphs and charts that you shared with us?
Yeah, I'll put that. We do post-election reports after every cycle. So those are all at womenrun.rutgers.edu. And then our just day-to-day numbers, I'll put are just on our main site. We have a fax. It's not the exact charts, but all of that data is available under current numbers. And then we have a breakdown for each race and ethnicity. And all of that breaks it down by party and historically as well.
How do you get information on individual states? Somebody who is from Ohio, like Julie and I, was asking, about state-specific information, especially like in reference to New Americans.
Yeah.
Yeah, Shayna, I think you can drop some things in the link and if you haven't already, but our state representation report actually does break it down by state, some of the things that Shayna's talked about. If you there's been 3 iterations of the state representation. We do it every 2 years. And so you can follow and actually see the trends of that and how that's changed. And then lastly, our New American Candidate Tracker is also publicly available. You just have to sort of submit a password or put in your some credentials in there very quickly and lightly. But those are all available and accessible and are meant to be a resources for others to use.
And I just put the links. There's 2 ways to get state data. We have a summary. We have a page for every state. So that's a nice summary format. But then if you're looking for very specific things and you want list of names, you can go to our database and filter by state.
Okay. Someone asked if there were only wins in urban districts.
No, their wins are all over, from a rural to urban and in all regions of the country. We have had a few states as New Americans where we haven't had a New American in the state legislature, but those are actually fewer than you would think, and so it's great progress. But New Americans are everywhere, and that's something actually in my 5 years as being a CEO, that's something that I've also had to dispel as a myth. New Americans are in every corner of this country, and they are part of a fabric in the history of every community. If there is a thriving community somewhere, it is because communities of color have been part of that building up or has been built on the backs of those communities of color in the process. And so I think that's really important to note. And I think it's important to note that these services and these training programs are needed in every corner of the country as well. Not just about identifying, it's also going in to support them.
Yeah, and like Gita mentioned, we've seen New American women running in rural Kansas, so they're everywhere.
Are you seeing more Dem women enthusiastic even though Kamala lost?
Definitely. Yeah, we are actually I'll note this. Since January, we have seen a significant increase in the number of folks interested. As a matter of fact, there are programs which you apply to have a waiting list at this moment because of that, and it's really exciting. Now, I will say that not all of our trainings are women specific. We do have trainings that are women specific, including a very unique program that we run called Rising to Run for women who previously ran and lost. But we are very, very excited to be seeing the enthusiasm. I will say that a lot of it right now is enthusiasm for more local and state level offices because there's more a sense of being able to contribute and make a difference at this time versus federal. But I think that there's always excitement around federal, but it's really nice to see around local and state.
I would just add to that one of the things that I know a lot of us have been trying to intervene on is the narrative after Kamala's loss. To be very clear that, this is a nuance that sometimes is not covered or not grasped, which is she absolutely faced sexism and racism, no doubt. We can talk all about that. However, those were not the primary factors or only factors that contributed to her defeat. In fact, like I would argue to you that Joe Biden would have also lost this election. And so being clear to like distinguish between those things. We don't want to not tell the story that sexism and racism are part of this environment. But we also want to make clear that that she did not lose because of her race. She did not lose because of her gender. And therefore that shouldn't discourage others who share those identities or women who just are trying to run for an office where a woman hasn't held it before, to think that it's impossible, that race has so many of its own dynamics at play. And we just need to be careful about that narrative.
Have you all been in contact with the Seneca Project? I don't know what that is, but someone asked.
I'm not sure what that is either, actually.
I can only guess that it's around Seneca Falls.
And then I think you just mentioned about some one pagers, but someone was asking, is there a one pager with the top line stats that show that women are electable that somebody could have and, have it ready?
That would be a great one pager. We don't have it in one page format. We have kind of all the stuff we've kind of, I've some of the stuff I've presented tonight, and then if in any of our reports, all of that data is available. So, certainly it could be translated into a one pager just to kind of make that case. And it sounds like Gita and Shayna have it in a good format as well.
Yeah, it's hard to sort of digest and make all this information into a one pager, but we have a few resources that I think could serve the function that you're looking for, including one on women in particular. And thank you for sharing the Seneca project. I hadn't heard about it, and so I'll check it out.
Yeah, thank you.
Is there research on how women running are supported? This person too was in Ohio, like me and Julie, and they mentioned here we have the Matriots pack. We've got Lead Ohio as well. We've got several groups that are actually really encouraging women to run and actually have goals to have specific amounts of women, like in our state legislature as an example, by a certain date. So are there groups like that all over the country? Is anyone, tracking to see how successful they're being?
Yeah, a couple of resources. We have the Women, Money, and Politics Watch, like I mentioned before. So in terms of PACs, so that information is not specific to PACs, but it comes in part also from Open Secrets. Open Secrets provides information about some of these specific PACs. And then we have a political power map on the COP site, which gives you a sense of, in each of these states, are there women's political PACs? Are there other trainings? And I will say to everybody on this call, if you look at that map and you see that an organization you're a part of is not on there, we're always kind of, changing it. But that gives you just a sense of just where places exist. There's a good amount of academic research, including from my colleague, Kira Sambamatu, about the importance of training programs, especially those that are over time and creating networks of support. I will leave it to my colleagues who are also doing this work to kind of speak to others, but certainly we see evidence that it matters. So there's some evidence both obviously about the magnitude as well as how these types of programs, as well as how these PACs can be influential.
And then last one I have is someone was concerned about election interference. So what are people doing to block, anyone from messing with this election, especially, or even an election that women are running in, period? That was their question. I know what we do here at Red, White, and Blue is we encourage folks to talk to their friends and family. Relational organizing, beats a whole lot of things. But is there anything else out there that folks are doing specifically?
I mean, in addition to the relational organizing, I would really encourage folks to do their own research and not rely on what they see out there, particularly on social media. I think it's really easy to fall into those traps. And all of a sudden, nobody knows where it came from or what this thing was or where the origin of it. And it's really important that folks are really doing their own research. If you want to be a responsible voter in this country at this time, I think you're required to do your own research.
Okay.
Drop the mic.
Julie, I'll kick it back over to you. Thank you, ladies, for being here tonight.
That's a mic drop. That's the perfect place to end. Perfect advice. So thank you so much to Shayna and Gita and Kelly for all of your amazing work and information and knowledge. And thank you all for your time. And we appreciate you being here. Everybody have a really great evening. Hope to see you soon.